Hey, folks, welcome to the BeyondTheBaselines.com podcast. I'm Ed Chaniffy, your host. And on the line, we've got the author of The Warrior, Rafael Nadal, and his Kingdom of Clay, Christopher Clarey. Great to have you, and thanks for being here.
Ed, you know your tennis, so it's great to be with you too. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
It's going to be fantastic. I got your book a week ago, pre publicity, and I got through most of it. I couldn't read all of it, but I got through most of it. But obviously, Rafa's retiring. Is that what was behind the inspiration to write this and take it to print?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a journalist, if you have this opportunity, like I did, working for the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune for so long and covering tennis for, all those years, I felt like I had this courtside seat, to this amazing era of tennis, and I would have really regretted it. I kind of function that way. I don't know how you function, Ed, but I don't mind living with disappointment, but I don't want to live with regret. So I would have regretted not writing the book about Federer that I did, and this was sort of the same thing. I just had a lot of great contact with Nadal. I'd seen all of his great matches, covered him for so long, and this topic and this idea of Roland Garros. My wife's French. Yeah, I've lived in Paris a lot of my adult life. My kids are French American, and it's the tournament of all the sporting events that I've covered, and I've covered all the different ones over the years, is the one that I probably know the best and connect with. So the convergence of that plus Nadal's just amazing dominance in that tournament, obviously the things about his whole career, and this is why the timing is now, but it's obviously seen through a clay court Roland Garros lens.
Yeah, the brick dust of Roland Garros. You talk about the surface a lot in the book, which I love because I'm a tennis guy, as you know, as you said, thank you, and I love surfaces. I've been to the French a couple times. It's the most intimate of the four Grand Slams, and I think that comes across in your book. How would I bumped into Randy Walker the other day. He saw that we were going to be on the interview together, and he said, Christopher hasn't missed a Grand Slam in so many years. You've been to all four. Why Roland Garros? You love it. Is it the most intimate? Do you agree with me? And do you agree that maybe it takes, I hate to say this, maybe the most athleticism? You talk about the sliding and how you approach a ball on clay. How would you talk about the athleticism required and if it's the most intimate of the four Grand Slams?
Yeah, I think it is the most intimate. I mean, some would say the most crowded. You can go either way, right? There's a downside to that intimacy, and they have expanded the grounds quite a lot. I don't know the last time you were there, Ed, but
A long time ago, 1998, 99.
you wouldn't recognize a lot of it anymore. The change has been really dramatic. And
Okay.
for me, I went my first year there was 1991, and there's hardly anything left on the grounds from that era. All the stadiums
Really?
redone, rebuilt. They extended into the botanical gardens, which
Yep.
was a no-go zone for a long time. They managed to win that battle and get in there, and it's really changed the feeling. It's very elongated now. It's kind of like a sort of snakes through the whole area. But it's still very narrow, so it has that cozy feel. And I
Hmm.
think that's part of the charm of Roland Garros is that it's still in Paris in a way. It's right on the edge, but it's still part of that central Paris core. And you can walk not too far away and have a cafe and be in Porte d'Auteuil, which is it feels very much like classic Paris. So that's part of the charm. I do think that they have not always they've sometimes erred on the side of having it be too many fans in there for the small space. It can feel like
Hmm.
a packed metro platform sometimes. But I do feel it's got a great vibe when you're on the court watching clay court tennis be played live. You hear the sound, the scrapes, the long points, longer than any other surface still, even though it's changed some. Obviously, there's been more homogenization of surfaces and tennis styles of play, which is part of the reason for, the big three and success over the years was they were able to play in similar ways on all the surfaces. But clay is still, I think, the most geometric, most demanding. You got to earn your spurs on it, and that's part of the reason why Nadal did so well. He didn't mind that. He had that patience before he'd hit that killer forehand and finish off the point or the forehand drop, and he knew how to create the angles and play the points like a clay court master.
Yeah, I mean, we're gonna miss him. He is a master, and I don't think anyone's ever. You talk about this in the book. I don't think anyone's ever gonna break his record. I don't know if it's physically possible given the longer seasons we have now. Um, but what do you see? Do you see Nadal's? You talk about the big three. We're talking, Federer, Djokovic, Nadal. I don't know if we're ever going to have that again. Do you see Nadal's legacy as part of the big three, and do you see it separate from Roland Garros? I mean, can it be separated from Roland Garros? And do you see it? It would have been different if he hadn't had the other two there, right?
Oh, for sure. And you make a great point. And I think it's also it was one of the tricky things about writing this book was that I didn't want to reduce Nadal to a clay court specialist. And I know that I mean I know Nadal and his people and his camp was a bit concerned about, Rafa's not just a clay courter. And that's true. He's not. I mean, he won 8 majors besides the French Open. And 8 majors. You know who else won 8 majors? Ivan Lendl, Jimmy Connors, and Andre Agassi. So even if he had never played on clay,
He
he
would have
would
been up there.
he would have been in their category, and that's Hall of Famer without a doubt, and an all-time great. So you got to put that in perspective, and obviously he won Wimbledon twice. He won them all twice besides the French, and had some of his greatest victories outside of Paris. But nobody on the men's side has dominated a surface like this in the Open era. Nobody has dominated a major on the men's side like this ever. It's a long history, tennis. So you can't disassociate Rafa from that. And I think he was great in everything else, but he had kind of a 50-50 record in finals and majors outside of clay. You know what
Mm-hmm.
his record was at Roland Garros in the final?
100. He lost one. Didn't he lose one at Djokovic? No, 100%.
14, 14 titles, 14-0 in the final, which is crazy, which is insane.
That's nuts.
I
That's
think
nuts.
Djokovic is 10-0 at the Aussie Open in finals as well, if I'm
Okay.
not mistaken.
All right.
And 10 in any other era would have been, my gosh, Djokovic,
Yeah.
hardcore Australian Open. But when 14 and 10, that's still a pretty big delta. It's still a big delta. So I just think you can't. What's Rafa's legacy going to be, Ed? Maybe 20 years from now, if we're having this conversation, people's memories tend to reduce things over time. It's going to be 14 clay. You're going to see clay in your mind's eye. You're just going to see it.
Yep.
So I think that's why I wanted the book to be based around that. And I feel like, but Nadal, you really shouldn't underestimate his achievements on other surfaces because he was definitely an all court, all surface champion.
Well, and correct me if I'm wrong. You know his history so much better than I do. But that massive match, the one that went into the evening at Wimbledon with Fed, that was 2008. Was what year?
Correct. 2008 final,
2008.
9-7 in the fifth. Yep.
Right. And it was dark. People's, you couldn't see the ball. One of the greatest, probably the greatest match of all time, one of the best, especially at Wimbledon. But I think if I remember reading your book correctly, Nadal had won Queens that year, going into it. So, that's what I couldn't believe. He won the French. Now, I remember I worked at Queens. He won the French. And then when we're at Queens working, we're always watching the French finals, like during qualifiers at Queens. Then he comes up to London. He wins the Stella. At the time, it was the Stella, I think. Then he goes on and wins Wimbledon. Federer went over to Germany, won the grass court over there. So it was kind of the clash of the Titans. But if you think physically, to win those three tournaments in a row, I don't know if it's ever been done again. I mean, but to go French, to go Stella, and then go Wimbledon, that's quite a 3 week, 4 week stint.
Well, nobody did the French Wimbledon double until Nadal did it since Borg. So yeah,
So yeah, so no one's
I
done
don't, and
it.
I don't think Borg did play Queens if I recall correctly. I don't think Borg came over and played it. I think he went French break and then he played. I may be wrong, but
Yeah,
I don't recall him doing that triple. But he was certainly the other guy who would have been capable of it. And obviously Roger did do it the following year. He pulled it off when he won the French. He was able to. He was able
yeah,
to. So it's something that's just speaks to Nadal's drive and his commitment. And I think he was very much. First time I ever saw Rafa play was at Wimbledon. It was 2003 when he made his Grand Slam main draw debut there
yep,
in his teens. And I watched him and interviewed him afterward. And we did it in Spanish with a very small group of us. He had just beaten Mario Ancic in the first round. I mean, Ancic was a pretty fair grass court player and a pretty fair player in his day. And Rafa was, very composed, not super long answers or anything, but what he made clear was he wanted to be good on grass. He was he was
yeah.
he was very much on that track from a very early age. It was part of his plan. He liked it. He enjoyed it. And you think about it, I mean, what do you play soccer on? The guy was a great soccer player. He played on grass, right? So he loved. I don't think he had any aversion to the surface. He wasn't some Sergi Bruguera guy who would call grass was only good for cows or whatever Sergi's line was. So, definitely he had a different approach to it. And I think that positive attitude and energy paid off and also the change in surface. Let's be honest. I mean,
Yep.
the old style grass when It was a much lower bounce and more irregular, and serve and volley was kind of obligatory.
Yep.
I don't know if Nadal wins in those conditions, but because you got, a truer surface, a
Yep.
little higher bounce, they change the balls. It's still different. I mean, anybody who watches grass, you worked at Queens, you know. I
Yeah.
mean, even in the
Yeah.
modern era with new technology, you hit a good slice backhand, it's going to stay lower on
You get a
grass,
good lob, it's not going to bounce up off the lob
right,
bounce.
than anything else. So Nadal, it was adverse conditions compared to Federer. So I was just so impressed with his ability to do that and bounce back. And you're right about that year, though. And he did go right over there and play that after the 2008 Roland Garros final. Maybe the advantage he had was that was probably the easiest Grand Slam final he had. He beat Federer, lost only 4 games in the '08 final at Roland Garros, just destroyed
Yeah.
him. And
Yeah.
I could tell he almost felt guilty about it. He almost felt he was just dissatisfied it wasn't a harder match. But then they made up for it at Wimbledon that year. That was a classic, and it was a complete clash of the Titans, and there was so much buildup. And the year before, 2007 final, had
Mhm.
been a classic at Wimbledon. No cover over center court. It was open to the elements. They were building it, so there's no other year like that. And they play an amazing match, and Roger wins it in 5. And Nadal ends up in the shower just sobbing because he felt he didn't give his best. So all that led to that match, and honestly, 14 French Opens is his unbeatable career achievement, but that victory at Wimbledon '08 for me is his greatest victory.
Yeah, that match, I was glued. You talk in the book about him as a junior, and what I found out I didn't know was, his parents were all, you said he played a lot of soccer. He was a two-sport kid growing up.
Yep.
And then his parents made him go to school. So I think there's a portion of the book you talk about him. His competitive nature is so competitive that he couldn't play the juniors. I think it was at Wimbledon or at the French,
The
and
French, he never played the French Open Juniors, never did.
right, and he went to watch it, and he could only watch 2 games. He was so annoyed he wasn't on the court. He left, and you saw him leave, and yeah, that just shows his competitive nature. I see it with every, my daughter's the same way. She said, "Dad, I shouldn't be watching this exhibition. I should be playing it." And she'll leave. She
Mhm.
can't concentrate. And you saw it firsthand when he was very young.
It's true. Rafa is an intense individual. I mean, he's good company, very pleasant with people, very friendly. Yeah, he shakes everybody's hand, but he's a competitor. I mean, you're playing cards with a guy, or their game of choice is parcheesi, Ed. They play that always in the players' lounge. I mean, of all things, why parcheesi? Parcheesi in Spanish. But they play it like it's a freaking Wimbledon final. They go crazy. So, watch Moya, his coach, and Rafa playing that, or Mark Lopez. It's serious business. So Rafa he's kind of hardwired that way, and as a young man he was too. And one of the things I learned right in the book was that Rafa actually had to learn to slow down when he was younger. He played too fast, which none of us would ever believe having watched him. Come on, bang, stop bouncing the ball and grabbing your
Crazy.
shorts and serve. But when he was young, that's what he did. He would grab the balls and he would play as a junior and go at light speed. And they were worried he was going to burn himself out. And I think they gave him some rituals like grabbing 3 balls, picking through them before he served to kind of slow him down and get the engine not revving so high the whole match. That's how that started. And he ended up putting it to good use and developing those routines. And as he would tell you, it went too far, but it was a big thing for him. And then the crazy thing is, he never played French Open juniors because he had to do his school exams.
Right.
He was such a prodigy that if he'd gone a little bit longer in school, he got to 16, finished his obligatory schooling. I'm sure he would have had to make that choice at some point or another. But at that age, his parents said, "Nope, you got to do your studies and finish them up. You're not going to play." And then he missed the 2003 French Open because of injury. He was playing around at home with some friends, jumped over a net. One of the kids actually lifted up the net, just kind of
I
joking
remember
around.
in the book. I
And
remember
Rafa
reading.
trips and
Yeah.
injures himself, and he can't play the French Open. That would have been his debut. Following year, he has foot issue problem, and he can't play because of that. And that's when he goes to Roland Garros as a spectator with his agent Carlos Costa, former top 10 player, to meet sponsors and kind of get inside the atmosphere because Carlos knew it would be a special place for Rafa down the road. And it was tough for Rafa. I mean, just to watch the matches. And he said, when I come back here the next time, it's going to be to win, which
Yeah.
is an amazing thing to say. But he
It's
was right.
unbelievable.
And I still think, even though he would have been, what would he have been? 18 years old at the end of the French Open in 2004. I think he would have had a shot of winning that year. That was the year that Gaudio beat Coria in that crazy final and came back from 2 sets down. But Nadal had that level already, as you could see in the Davis Cup final later that year
Yep.
when he beat Roddick and on clay. So I think it was in a lot of ways a stay of execution for everybody else. Then he comes in '05 and he plays his first French Open and he's really the favorite. He's run the
Right.
table on the clay. Federer is seeded number one, but yeah, I think Nadal was for people who really knew their tennis and knew the clay. He was the favorite. And what does he do? He
Wins
pulls
it.
first time, first shot does it. I can't recall that anybody ever being at their first major and being the favorite and winning like that.
Unbelievable. How receptive was Rafa and his team? I mean, to you writing about this, were they helpful, collaborative? Were they involved?
All my books, I mean, that I've written so far have had to be independent books because when I started this project, I was a New York Times correspondent. We're not
Mhm.
allowed to write books with our subjects.
Okay.
It's a good rule. It wasn't always that way, but
Right.
it's a very good rule. You're not going to be in business with somebody you're reporting on. So this book is fully independent. It's based largely on all the interviews and time I spent with Rafa and his team over the years, but I did a lot of original reporting for it. And I
Yep.
was definitely in contact with them to let them know what I was doing, but they had no say in the book and very little input once I started to write it, a little bit here and there, but it was really an independent project and there's no way I could have written it without all those 20 years of covering them for the Times and the IHT.
Yeah. I mean, let me ask you a question about the big three again. I want to go back to that because
Yeah.
you think we're ever going to see an era like that again? I mean, we're talking about, I mean, think about what you just said, 2004, and we're just finishing, it's 2025. I mean, they've been in the, I mean, okay, Federer's been gone a couple years, but I mean, they dominated tennis for 18, 20 years. I mean, we ever going to see three men dominate like that again or three women?
Yeah, you think about it. I mean, Federer was what, 2003 to 2018, so it's a 15-year span between majors that he was winning.
Hmm.
Rafa 5 to 22, so that's 17 years.
Hmm.
Djokovic won in '08 and he won in 23, so that's 15 years and plus the Olympics last year. So those are huge spans of being able to win majors and still be relevant. That's the thing that may be very hard to replicate. Will we see three guys at the top again, interchanging victories and being big stars? I think that'll happen for sure. It might happen very soon, Ed. I mean, Alcaraz and Sinner are kind of already there. I think we could easily see a third guy join them. It might be a Fonseca or a Jakub Menšik from the Czech Republic, or how one would always hope it'd be an American. I don't necessarily see that, but you'd hope it would be. But I think that's quite possible. But to have three guys with that level of achievement still going at each other, to have that number of matches between them in big, big venues. I mean, you had 40 Federer Nadal matches, which sounds like a lot, but you know how many times Nadal and Djokovic played? 60.
They played 60
60
times?
times. And the final score and the final tally, 31 to 29
Wow.
for Djokovic. The Olympic match in last year was a decider. So I don't see that happening anytime soon. Maybe never again. Those three guys with that level of dominance at the top. But that tennis will be a three-headed monster again for sure. I see that happening. And I think the guys at the top now have a lot of appeal, the younger guys, but it takes a long time to develop that connection with the public and develop that deep interest in these rivalries. And those guys, with help from Murray and Vavrinka and a little Delpo in there as well, they
Yep.
they set the bar so high. I mean, women's tennis had it for a while with Chrissy and Martina, but that was just
Yep.
two.
Yep.
And they
Tracy a
all
little bit, Tracy Austin a little bit, but
people came in, but not for that lump. These guys were together, all three of them, really, for 15 years.
yeah.
So good luck matching that.
Yeah. And I got to ask you because people are going to ask, who's the GOAT of the three? Is there one?
I never liked that. I mean, I have my own goat. There's GOAT goat. There's that spelling, greatest of all time. And I reject that in men's tennis because I feel like it's not apples to apples. The
Right.
Laver, the Rose Walls, the Pancho
Sampras.
Gonzalez's, the Kramers, all those guys, they were not playing for the same things that these guys today are playing for. The
Right.
majors were not the be all end all. They couldn't have long careers like these guys were able to. They turned pro or other things happened. Bjorn Borg played the Aussie Open one time in his
That's
these guys
amazing. That's a
these guys
great stat. I didn't know that.
15, 20 times, and that's another 15, 20 chances to win a major. So the major count is such a big deal, and I don't think that really applies to the previous eras at all in the same way. Maybe Wimbledon's or US championships. So I personally put that aside. But there is another GOAT that I can go into, which is GOTE, greatest of the era. That I can get into.
Okay.
So greatest of the era, I mean, it's a all surface sport, right? and it's about longevity and excellence, and it's a head-to-head sport. You can't not give it to Djokovic because he's got the edge and everything. He's got the head-to-head edge just barely over Rafa, even though Rafa has beaten him in more Grand Slam finals, but that's a lot of those have been on clay. Um, and he's got a clear edge on Federer, and he also has the record they were all really chasing. He was chasing it the most openly with
Right.
4 majors, and he has a record I think which is in many ways probably the most impressive, which is he has the consecutive or the overall weeks at #1 on the computer, blows everybody away in that. And those 2 records are very compelling to me, and that's apples to apples. And so I think he deserves it, and I think Rafa and Roger both are sort of a close second. Nadal, I think overall consistency, being in the top 10 so often and for so long in a row, despite all the injuries and things he faced, in some ways maybe slightly more impressive than Roger. But Roger, you have to talk about the intangibles with Roger and the connection he made with people and what he did for the game and all
The
the
Labor Cup and all that he's left
great stuff
behind.
at Wimbledon and all the things that he's done. I mean, you're out there in the business of tennis. Who do you think's had the most impact? I would have to say it's probably Roger, right?
Yeah, Roger, especially with the generation, maybe my generation a little older for sure.
Yeah, I
Maybe
agree with that. So it's a wonderful debate. I think you have to give it to Djokovic if we're talking about pure competition, but there's more to it than that. But I think he deserves it, and honestly, he wanted it and he chased it the most openly of all of them. And Federer, let's not forget, is 5 years older than Rafa and 6 years older than Djokovic. So Federer to be able to play with these guys as long as he did was a great achievement. But he was in tennis generations in a different generation.
yeah, yep. So Henner Leonard says hello. I saw him this morning, and he said, "Ed, you're going to really be interesting with Christopher because you guys are both wordsmiths, and you used a couple words. Uh, Henner knows me because I've helped him with his career, but you used a word called I hope I say this right, braggadocio, and
Uh-huh.
I had never heard of that word. And it's kind of like a braggart. I figured it's got to be something like that. Is that like where did that come from, that word? How did you use that word? I think it's
It's
fantastic.
Italian word is swagger. I don't remember where I used it. I wrote too many words in this book, yeah, but I mean, yeah, it's about sort of swagger and confidence and
Yeah. No, you
yeah.
used it beautifully. It was and I had to go look it up. And it is actually, it's I thought you were making it up, but no, it's in the dictionary. I was like, fantastic stuff. But Henner says hello.
Henner goes back to my days in Coronado, and he was a fine junior player when we were all sort of struggling, and he was also a guy who you could tell he had a real passion and commitment to his tennis from a very young age. So I'm glad to see that he's done well.
Yeah, he loves his tennis. He's still a great player. Too many times I've lost to him here on the court in exhibition court in Vero. Um, but being a wordsmith and writing so much, what was the hardest part of this book for you? What was the toughest maybe chapter to write? Was there one? Was there something that you didn't want to, you know, talk about? Something, anything out there?
Well, I'd point. It's a great question. No one's asked me that question, and I've done a lot of interviews for this book, and so it's great to get one I haven't heard. And I'd say there are 2 chapters I would point to from a pure wordsmithian perspective. The chapter on language. There's a chapter on language. I don't know if you got to that or not, but there's a
I did
chapter.
not get to that chapter yet.
I want to check that one out because if you're a word guy, and that one sort of takes the language of tennis at Roland Garros because I speak French and
Hmm.
I speak my Spanish is hanging in there, so I can do that. But I talk about just the differences in the terminology and the way the game is talked about in the different countries, and also through Nadal's perspective in terms of how his game has been described. That was very challenging in a really cool way to try to bring that to life. I'm not sure anybody's written a chapter quite like that about when you're kind of intersecting all these different ways of looking at tennis and the language of tennis, and just sort of things like, if you're choking in French, you say "tu joues avec un petit bras," which means you're playing with a short arm, which is kind of means you're sort of tight and your arm's getting short and you're not able to play the way you should. And instead of a drop shot, they use the term amorti, which means basically shock absorber. You're just kind of
Okay.
absorbing the shock of the shot. So I personally, as somebody who loves words, just love those distinctions and the different ways people express things. And instead of a bagel, it's a roue de bicyclette. It's a bicycle wheel. So it's just these things that you come across in the languages. So that was a great chapter to try to get right, and also talk about. Let's face it, for us, it's the French Open still, but for the French, it's not the French Open. It's Roland Garros, which is
Right.
not the easiest thing for a lot of people to pronounce. and from what I've been told, almost unpronounceable in Chinese, so very hard to get across all cultures. But it's something that for them in the internet era, now when you got social media, to have two identities used to be no problem. And if I in the New York Times wrote French Open, who really cared? But now, since it's all the same accounts and marketing and everything else, they need unity. Wimbledon has that. US Open has that. So it's been challenging for them. They've had to really fight that. So that was an interesting issue. But the most challenging wordsmithian chapter to write, because it was very sensitive and I think important to do it just right, was a chapter in there called The Backlash, which talks about the evolution and devolution, I guess, of Nadal and the French public and the way he was perceived at Roland Garros over the years. And it's an interesting one to have been part of and seen. A lot of rejection of him at times when he was beaten for the first time there in 2009 against Robin Soderling. You know, a very hostile crowd, really anti-Nadal. They were tired of his dominance. It was also a period when there was a lot of focus, justifiably so, on doping in international sport and a lot of concern. Nadal, with his very physical, dominating approach, I think people had suspicions. Nothing has ever been confirmed, and Rafa has fought some of the things that have been said in court and won. And he's always, I talked about it with him at a very early age, and he was always very openly rejecting any kind of insinuation and just saying, that's not my vision of sport, not the way I view it. But writing that chapter, which is a very detailed chapter and talks about a lot of different elements, was a journalistic challenge to be sure.
Yeah, that was a tough era. I mean, we're seeing a little bit of it now. With we can see how people are reacting to Sinner and what's
Yeah.
going on there, and it was even, I think, a bit louder might be the right word back then, because
Well,
tennis.
Lance Armstrong is a big part of the reason. Tour de France, all those victories in French culture.
Yeah, you know what? That's a
And then
great
somebody
point.
from the outside, and he ended up all being stripped, and there were so many suspicions. So someone like Rafa, definitely paid a price in the public domain for the sins of many other athletes. But I will never criticize sporting authorities for trying to police it, because what's the alternative, Ed? I mean, the alternative is you have to cheat or you have to abuse your body to have any chance, and that's not the way anybody wants to do sport. So, but it's been tough at times to cover it as a journalist, and also I'm sure tough for Nadal to handle.
Last question for you, and Randy Walker, who you know is in the publishing business, great friend of mine, will love this question because he works with so many authors just like you do. And you're one of the best in the business in tennis. How did this book differ from the book that you did on Roger Federer called The Master? How did this is a different person, obviously, different talent on clay, different talents on grass, but a very different upbringing and a very different viewpoint of where tennis is in both their lives. How did you find this book different? Like, what was different in writing it?
Well, that's a great question, and an important one for me. I mean, my thinking was that a lot of people who are going to read this book would have read The Master, the book on Federer, because there's a lot of commonalities and interests, and people who love tennis or would be interested in both or know my work. So I went into it knowing that. And so also, having written these big books after years of his daily journalism, when you're writing 1,000 words a day and whew, let's go have dinner, we're done.
Yeah.
Book is not like that. It's like it lives in your head for a year or 2 years. It just never goes away. And that's a very, very different vibe than, I mean, when you're covering a beat, you're thinking about your stories and what you're going to do, but you have that sense of completion every day where you have, okay, it's out there. Maybe you get that from your readers or you get that from your readers, but there's a reaction and it's materially, it's there. This is a very different challenge. And so given that, I knew I did not want to write a book that was similar in structure to the Federer book. The Federer book is a little bit more of a classic biography, even though it's got an unusual structure in that it's written around places. It's not strictly chronological. It's all the places where we did interviews, all the places that mattered to Roger, be it South Africa, where his mom's from, be it Basel, Switzerland, be it Indian Wells, be it all these different places. That's sort of the structure. And that was challenging because you had to, from a writer's perspective, tell the story of a career that was linear, but kind of go in and out with these places. I mean, you write about Wimbledon early in the book. He played Wimbledon 20 times. He keeps going back. So how do you finding a way to navigate that was the challenge, but I think it worked. This one I knew I couldn't do the same way, and I didn't want it to be, Rafa's born, boy child in Mallorca, and he grows up a prodigy, and then he goes on. No, it had to be for me something more compelling as a format. So my idea was to bring the two together, was to bring together the place and in a way the surface, which you said you're
Yep.
connected to, and I am too. To me, it's very exotic as a California, Hawaii kid. I only played on hard courts, so I was always fascinated by it. But I know you have more hard shoe on the east.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
But hard true is different from red brick dust.
sure.
So different.
Yes, actually, brick. It's bricks like it's not stone. Hard shoe
No.
stone, right?
Yeah.
So but I just felt like I wanted to do the difficult thing in a book was to bring the two together and have Nadal kind of become one with the place and the surface, and the place become one with Nadal because they did change each other in big and very very powerful ways. Rafa was changed by what happened to him at Roland Garros, what he achieved there, and Roland Garros has been materially changed by what Nadal did, both in the perception of the tournament by people around the world, and then if you walk in the front gate when you go back the next time, you will see it. You go down the stairs of the new entrance, and there's this massive stainless steel statue of Rafa, the Spaniard, in
Yep.
France. I mean, pull that off. Pull that off. He became so inevitable they had to do it. So I think that was what I hoped to capture with the book was man in place and all that. And that was really I think a fun idea when I had it, but it was tough to do. Very tough.
No, you do it well. I mean, I knew that's what you're getting to when I got to the chapter called the canvas, and you start painting the canvas and this. And I love courts. I love clay, and I was just in a big conversation with one of the clubs I manage about the difference between clay courts and hard true courts. They're so different. A true clay from like the Appalachians compared to hard true, which is from Virginia, and it's just a different. It's a stone, as you said, it's a stone. But you paint, and that's I'm gonna. I don't have any more questions for you. I'm just gonna say, guys, go out and read this book. I'm almost through it. I loved it. It's here. I don't know if you can see it, but it's a.
A little blurry, kind of like me at this point. I like it.
Let's see if I can get it. Let's see if I can there. Anyhow, it's the best, and I'm loving how you paint the picture of France because I think that for the romance of the sport is a wonderful part of the book for us who are romantically involved with the sport as well as it being our business. But
Mm.
I love that part of it, and if I have one last thing to ask you, who do you think's going to win it this year?
Ah.
Because
Well,
it's a
it's
good one.
it's it's getting interesting now. I mean, this year is a very interesting one. I mean, you've had people come in the past with Rafa or Iga. You had sort of kind of clear cut favorites. I don't see it that way this year. And on the men's side, I personally think if all things are equal and everybody plays close to their best, it's Alcaraz's. I think he's got the game on clay, and I think he's proven he can do it. But Sinner coming back from his suspension looks awfully fresh, and he knows how to play on clay, and he's probably feels like he's got a burden off his back now. He's able to play, and he's free of all the concerns about that. He's a tremendous talent. Zverev is due. You got to figure he'll find a way to get one, at least one in his career, and clay would probably be his best shot, but he hasn't done it yet. And you got guys, like Casper Ruud, who also is due, and he's been playing well. So I think the men's side is there aren't that many guys who could win it, but there's a group at the top where you just don't know. And you've also got to include a guy like a Musetti in there and players of that ilk. And you can't ever rule Djokovic out. I mean, I don't think you 5%, 10% chance, but you cannot rule out greatness. And the
Can't rule him out.
women's side is even more interesting because Iga really is, I think, in crisis.
Yep.
Time champion at the French. She has that great clay court game based on Rafa's model in a lot of ways, but she's just not there right now. If she can right the ship, it'll be an incredible comeback for her mentally, I think. So I don't see that. So I sort of see Sabalenka, Zheng Qinwen, won the Olympics at Roland Garros last year, has had a kind of an off year, but she's playing great again, getting deep in Italy and beating Sabalenka for the first time on clay. And she's probably a little fresher than some of the other players too. Hasn't had as many matches under her belt this year. That would be a big story for her to pull that off.
Paulini, I mean, she's got to be able to.
Paolini, I don't, Paolini's gotten close. She's in the final of the Italian Open, first Italian woman to do there since Irani. Irani also was a French Open finalist. So yeah, you can't rule her out either. She's got a good coaching arrangement now, doing well. So there's a lot of players, and you got Coco Gauff, who, if she plays well, I think has every chance of winning. She loves clay and has been working on her French language ceremonial speech for quite a while. She's ready to rock if she wins. So you hope for that. And then there's a couple outsiders. Andreeva really isn't a full outsider anymore, obviously, young
Right.
from Russia. And then her doubles partner, um, Diana Schneider, who played college tennis in the U.S. at NC State for a year.
Yep.
She's a big time talent, and she loves the clay, and she's had some great matches already this season. So there, I think it's a fascinating French Open, one of the more open ones that I've seen in recent years.
Well, I'll be watching it and thinking of you. And thank you so much for being on with us and taking the time out of your schedule. And I wish you all the best with the book launch. It's a great book. Can't wait to finish it.
Hey, yeah, that's great to hear. I really appreciate that, and it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
Thank you.